We're looking at Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to 21. Here's an interesting thing for you. Here we go. It should hopefully appear. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined with him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, "You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." The first thing that I really think is worth us putting out from this passage in Galatians is that there is new birth in Antioch. And Andy spoke last week about the gospel. And the reason we love the gospel, the reason we love to talk about Jesus, is that Jesus offers every single person the opportunity of a new start, a new beginning, new life, new birth. And so Peter, a guy who had probably grown up as a fisherman, maybe, we don't know a lot about him, maybe had a mixed upbringing, and he meets Jesus, and new life, a new beginning, a new start is offered to him. Paul, a man who actually says he self-confesses, "I used to be a terrorist. I used to go around trying to kill people, and I was met by Jesus, and he gave me a new start, a new beginning, a new birth." And the graphic that we have on the screen here, is that this is the gospel that is available every time we speak of Jesus. Every time you hear of Jesus, this is what is on offer to you and to every person. There's a you that's in red. You have a life. Every person has a life. And this is the same for the twins. It's the same for me. It's the same for every one of us. We're born with something. Now, the thing that we're born with, the gospel says, is good. It's from God. There's so much good. But there's stuff that is in it, which is called sin or evil or an oppression, which comes at us and over us. And it causes us not to have the life that we were created to have. And what Jesus' solution to that is to say that, why don't you take my death as your own, to bring an end to your life as it has been? Be crucified with me, as he was on this thing. Choose to have an end to your life your way. You doing what you think is the best thing. Bring an end to that. And so Paul says that takes you to a point of I no longer live. Peter got to the point where he was like, it's no longer me living anymore. Paul got to the point where he was blind. I no longer live anymore. I get to the point where I'm like, I'm tired of trying to work this out myself. I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this way anymore. It doesn't work. I no longer live. And at that moment, the gospel is this, that when you get to that moment, Jesus himself, the Son of God, comes to you and says, okay, I'm going to come and live with you, in you. I'm going to give my strength, my wisdom, my power, all I am to serve you and enable you to become more alive than you've ever been, than you could ever imagine. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. And if you've come here today and you're not a Christian and you're just here because you've been invited or because you're trying to be polite or you're seeking something, the gospel is this. Jesus says when you get to the point where you say, I will no longer live my own way. I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of this. I'm sick. I feel like I'm sick. I feel like I'm just leading in a way that isn't good. At that point, he says, tap, tap, tap on the shoulder. Hey, do you know what? I can give you a new beginning, a new start. Come, take me, have faith in me, and I will give you wisdom, strength, power, a future that you could never imagine. And if you've had that 1,000 times, he says it to you again today. This is the gospel. This is what he offers you. And the thing that is true about the gospel is that as he comes and says it to you, he says it to the person next to you and the person next to them. Just have a look down your row. Jesus says to them, would you have new life in me? And if they say yes, then they become family. Equal family, everybody like siblings born again by Jesus. And so the good news that you should know is that the abundant goodness of God is available to all people. All people. All people. Just say all people. All people. To all people. And what happens in Antioch is what happens over and over again throughout history, throughout your life, throughout my life. A blast from the past comes in. A blast from the past comes in and causes, first of all, Peter, Cephas they call him, but first of all, Peter, and then even Barnabas, to begin to live again as if the old life is the life. To begin to say that we are not siblings in Jesus. No, instead, the things that used to define us and separate us continue to define and separate us. Let me explain this to you. Now, Peter, as a Jew, would have grown up with a very clear understanding that as a Jewish person, God has set you apart. And so if you're born with the blood of Abraham flowing through you, there's just lots of things you would do, but one of them is you would never eat with somebody who has not got the blood of Abraham flowing through them. You'd never eat with them. You'd never eat with them. You might speak to them, you might even say, yes, you can come and meet our God and know our God, but you'd never eat with them, because it is the distinction between we are the people who have the blood of Abraham, we're the chosen people, we only eat with people who God has set apart from birth. And so you're welcome, but you can't eat with us. Now, when Jesus comes in, he says, you're set apart from birth, but your birth is no longer the birth that you had when your mother gave birth to you. Your birth is now the birth you had when Jesus, by his Spirit, gave birth to you as a new birth. And the blood that flows in you now is not the blood of your ancestors, but it's the blood of Jesus himself flowing through you. So now you sit and eat with people who have been set apart with, that have the blood of Jesus flowing through them, set apart from birth. That means you eat with any person, any riffraff, any person who Jesus has said yes to, you would now eat with them. And that's what they did. It was shocking. It was shocking. It was really shocking. And so this is the way it was in Antioch. And then some guys come in and they start looking at Peter and saying, we used to respect you, Peter. We used to think you were a leader. We used to think you were a guy who we could listen to and trust. Now you're eating with sinners. You're disobeying the Lord. We used to think you were somebody to trust. I'm going to stop following you on Twitter. I'm going to start asking some questions. And Peter, out of fear of his reputation, says, do you know what? Yeah. I'll stop eating with that lot because only for your sake, I'm going to now eat with you, just so that you feel okay. What he's basically implying to people who are watching is, number one, okay, if you're from another nation, yeah, you're probably a Christian, but you're not truly part of my family. Number one. Secondly, new birth that we all receive from Jesus isn't really the defining new birth in our lives. The thing that really defines us is who you were born as a real baby. That's the real thing. Because I'll spend time with people who were born as a baby like I was born as a baby. And if you were born as a different kind of baby, then I'm going to spend time with you. So the first thing is that, let me remember, Gentiles, if you're from another nation, you're not really part of my family. I'll be kind to you, but not really part of my family. Second thing is, new birth isn't really the big thing. The big thing is who you were truly born as when you were born, of your mother. And the third thing is that Jesus living in you isn't really enough. It isn't really enough. You've got to add a bit extra on as well. Otherwise, yeah, we're not equal. And Paul comes in and is like, you're condemned, you're a hypocrite, you've been led astray, you're not acting, this is a crucial bit, you are not acting in line with the gospel. Say gospel. You're not acting in line with the gospel. I mean, Paul does this in public, in front of everyone. And we love him for it, don't we? We love him for it. Here's the two shocking truths about the Christian faith. And if you're a Christian, this is your faith. These are two shocking truths about your faith. And if you're not a Christian, you're looking in. Here's two shocking truths that could be true about you if you choose and when you choose to become a Christian. First one, anyone who comes to Jesus is on an absolute level playing field with everybody else in Jesus. There's no hierarchy. There's no, oh, you've been in it longer than me, therefore you're superior. There's no like, oh, you behave slightly better, so you're above. There's no like, you have this title, so you're up. No. Every single person in Jesus is on exactly the same level playing field. Shocking truth number one. Shocking truth number two is this. In our faith, becoming like Jesus is the only measure of success. The only measure of success is becoming like Jesus. The only measure of success. So let's just look at these two things. Anyone who comes to Jesus is on an absolute level playing field with everybody else in Jesus. So let me tell you about the defining feature of our family. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to get some chairs. I'm going to get some chairs. How many chairs should we get? Should we get 3 chairs? 3 chairs. One more chair. Okay, 3 chairs. I wonder. Shall we choose? Who should we choose? Oral, would you like to come and sit on one of my chairs? Let's give Oral a round of applause. Just tell us, have we got the other microphone? Just tell us your name.
My name is Oral Newville.
And Oral, where were you born? Where did you grow up? What is your family ethnicity?
I was born in Jamaica, grew up in Jamaica, and yeah.
I guess that means family ethnicity. Would you Jamaican? Jamaican. Wonderful. And what age were you when you came to know Jesus? Just roughly.
19.
19 years old. Amazing. Maddie, would you come and sit in this seat here? So tell us your name.
My name is Maddie.
And where did you grow up and what would your ethnicity be? And
I grew up in Romania, so I'm Romanian.
And what age were you when you came to know Jesus?
I've always known Jesus, but I got baptized when I was 18.
18, okay. You always knew him, but you got baptized when you were 18. Who else should we choose? Oh, Mr. Walker, Chris Walker, would you like to come? I knew you'd love this, Chris. You know the questions?
Yeah. Chris Walker, Croydon, Christian, 13.
Okay, now then, if you were to look at Oral alongside myself, you could find lots of things that Oral is much better than me at. Is it not correct, Oral, that you have at times been quite a decent sportsman?
Yes.
What was it that you did?
I used to do 1, 2, and 400 meters.
And you were quite fast, would it be fair to say? Would you remember the fastest time you ran for 100 meters?
10.39.
Now then, I won't tell you the fastest time I've ever run 100 meters. But it doesn't start with 10. So what you could do is you could say, he is superior to me when it comes to sport. And if you love sport, what you could begin to do is say, let me speak to Oral and not Tom, because he is superior in the realm of athleticism. And I wouldn't blame you, because it's true. But what you could also say is, well, Tom is a pastor, and Oral is not a pastor. And so what I want to do, if I want to really value the church, I will speak to Tom, because he's the pastor, and not Oral, because he's not the pastor. And Jesus says, everybody in me is on equal ground. Everybody is on equal ground. There's nobody who's higher. There's nobody who's lower. We all have equal value. Now, Maddie, we could find many things that Maddie is infinitely superior to me in. Is it not true, Maddie, that you continually buy nice things for other people? Is this not true? You do? That's correct. And we could find many things that would set Maddie apart and set her above me, or in other ways would set me above her. But in the kingdom, the question is, Maddie, do you have Jesus living in your heart?
Oh, yeah.
She really does. And so there is no distinction, no separation, no hierarchy, no superiority or inferiority, no preference between Maddie and myself. Maddie, who grew up in Romania, which is one of the poorest nations in all of Europe, and I, who grew up in this country, which is one of the richest nations in all of Europe. But there's no distinction. In Jesus, in our natural birth of our mother, there's many distinctions. But born again of Jesus, there is no distinction. Now, Chris, I've kind of used all my aces. Chris is a man of great learning and, in fact, significant accountancy potential and ability. Is that not correct?
Potential?
Well, I actually I have not seen it in play, but I imagine from the position that you hold in the working world that you must be incredibly talented when it comes to numbers.
No, I have people that do that for me.
So what you could do is you could think, oh, here is a man who's superior in so many ways to so many other. I mean, we've got a few accountants, I can spot them. But you could think, oh, what prestige to eat at the house of a man who has people who do accounts for him. If only I could speak to him at the coffee bar, then my life would be made so great. And Jesus says, I live in those who cannot do numbers as much as I live in this man. And all that counts in the kingdom is Jesus. He is the one who's called us and uses us. And so we can have another chair. Hopefully I won't knock the table over. And this is a chair that Jesus says any one of you can sit on. You are welcome on level playing field with the man who's run 100 meters in 10.39 seconds. For one of the kindest, most generous people we know, for a man who has people who do his accounts numbers for him. You can sit on a level playing field in the kingdom with equal access to Jesus and all of his wisdom and power and stature. This is the gospel. This is the gospel. Shall we give these guys a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, the reality is that nobody gets into the kingdom of Jesus through their own merit. Nobody did. If any of you think you're a Christian because you happen to be quite a good person, you don't understand. You're not a Christian. You're almost certainly not a Christian. You get in through the utter undeserved forgiveness of Jesus. Which means that when you sit on one of these chairs, all you think is, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be here. It wasn't through my merit. It wasn't through my birth. It wasn't because of the position I hold in a firm. It wasn't because of my natural... I don't deserve to be in this kingdom. It's pure grace. Now, what this does is it means you begin to look at every other person and think, well, if I didn't deserve this, I mean, they definitely don't deserve it. But it's not about who deserves it. It's about Jesus and his love. And so we need to be asking and pursuing and embodying the life of humble grace. This is what Paul is saying. Can we click on to our next one? Oh, let's go on to the one after this one. In the kingdom, you could imagine that the little red blob at the center is somebody who looks a lot like Jesus, who lives a lot like Jesus, who has a character of real holiness. Okay? It could be Jesus himself. And then the circles represent people who are increasingly less like Jesus. Increasingly less like Jesus. And what you could do is you could mark every person in this room against that, couldn't you? What you could do is mark every person in this room against that. Did you know that there's going to be a person in this room who's the biggest sinner? I mean, there has to be, hasn't there? In a room like this, there must be one person who in the last week has sinned more than all the rest of us. And so their cross could be way off. Right over in the white, over there. Way off from the center. The biggest sinner in the room. And there could be others who've lived so close this last week, so close to Jesus. You kind of look and think, there were moments when it felt like there was this glow that just exuded from them. I mean, there would be somebody in this room who's lived more like Jesus than anybody else this last week. Isn't there? There is. There must be. Now, what we could do is we could start ranking everybody. But that's not the way of the kingdom. Because in the kingdom, what matters is, if we click, next one I think, is your trajectory, not your proximity. So, the person who's been the biggest sinner this week might have come here desperate for Jesus. I want to pursue Jesus. I want to be for Jesus. Their arrow of the trajectory of their life is utterly, utterly towards Jesus. There could be somebody else here who looks like Jesus, who acts like Jesus. They never swear, they never do anything naughty, but in their heart, they think they're all right. They think they're all right. They think, yeah, I deserve to be treated well because I'm a good person. And the arrow of their heart is away from Jesus and his forgiveness and his mercy because they think they've got it all already. And this is the Pharisees. They stood there like, we aren't sick. We aren't sinners. We see, and Jesus is like, if you really could see, you'd know that I am the center of life. I am the center of everything. And what Paul really has a go at Peter and Cephas and the guys from he says from James, although they weren't from James, it's a bit complex, but is that these guys started turning people away from Jesus. The trajectory of their life was away from Jesus. And so the trajectory of our hearts and our lives is always, whoever you are the biggest, I'll try not to point anyone specific, the biggest sinner in this room this last week. Waft. What was it Dan did the other week? I just waft. If you seek Jesus, you're so welcome. The chair is here for you. Equal standing, co-heir with Christ. Biggest sinner, you're so welcome. Most holy, best behaved. If your heart is not towards Jesus, all you're going to find is you'll get annoyed with the grace that he lavishes on everybody else as he treats them co-equal with you, and you're thinking, they don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. What we've found in life is the more that Jesus, truly being like Jesus, truly having a trajectory towards Jesus, is the thing that you care about, the better life becomes. The more you don't hear me as better saying easier. Don't hear me saying a kind of more straightforward, but better, yes. Joy, peace, life, abundance of God, his goodness. The more your trajectory is towards him, the more he is the absolute center of your life. Now, another way of looking at this could be the question to say this. Everybody has a center. Look at these arrows. Everybody, your arrow of your life is taking you on a trajectory somewhere. You have a center of your life. What you target is your goal and your hopes, your ambitions, your plans, the things you think, that's what I need, that's what I want, that's my center. I can tell you what it is if I asked you what's your biggest nightmare in your life. Your biggest nightmare is the thing that is truly your center being taken away from you. Oh, my biggest nightmare is one of my kids dies. My biggest nightmare is I lose my job. My biggest nightmare is I'm sat at home on my own with no friends. It shows you what your biggest central thing is in your life. My biggest nightmare is that I'm worth nothing, that I don't have meaning, that I'm alone. Whatever that is, that shows you the central thing. That's what you really will shoot for with your trajectory of your life. You may say you're a Christian, you may say not a Christian, but that will show you your biggest nightmare. And Jesus says, make me the central thing of your life. Make me the central thing of your life. Because I am the one who can be trusted in every context, in every situation, to truly give you what you yearn for and desire. I died for you, and I love you. So if you just do some maths, we have some accountants, we said that already. Just do the maths. Not many people would die for you. But if somebody does die for you, it probably suggests that they have your interests at heart, even above their own, right? That would be right, yeah? Their interests, they put your interests even above their own if they will die for you. And if that person also communicates constant love for you, I love you. Love is actually just the embodiment of putting somebody's interests above your own. I love you, I love you. I die for you and I love you. If somebody comes and says those two things to you, then that means that their heart for you is a heart that's love and goodness. And so Jesus wants you to be the center of your life because he wants you to do well. When he's at the center, life is well. So Paul says, the life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So my heart and my desire, our heart, the thing that's at the center, beating heart of this church, is to help you move towards becoming like Jesus. That's the central thing. We believe that is life. That's what it means to come to life, is for you to become like Jesus. We think about Elias and Jasmine. Our heart is they become like Jesus. That's our heart. Now, this doesn't mean that they'll put on sandals, grow their hair long, and die age 33. That's not what we mean by become like Jesus. What we mean like Jesus is the values that embodied Jesus will be the values that live in them. The beliefs that Jesus held will be the beliefs that they held. And one of the fundamental beliefs of Jesus was people from every nation and background would be genuinely united in him. So we want to be intentional about this. We really want to, can I just recommend some things that I think are so helpful for us to consider? If we really want to be like Jesus, if we really want to be people who live like him or moving into likeness of him, then drawing people from other nations together to sit and eat together has to be on the table. That's what this passage shows us. So here's some questions for you just to consider and think about if you want to become like Jesus. So what is the ethnic history of the people who most, in this last month, you've invited into your home? What ethnicity have they had? The people who've come into your home in the last month, what ethnicity have they had? And if you want to become more like Jesus, you begin to invite into your home people who have a range of different ethnic histories, because the more you do that, the more you see the bringing together of all nations. Here's another question. At your workplace, are you offering family to those who are very different from you in a way that makes others stop and think, what? They're like quite senior. They've been here a long time, and they're like hanging out with people who are really quite junior. They, I know, are somebody who's upper middle class, and they seem to be spending time with people who are working class. They are people who I know they've lived in a poor context, and they actually are befriending somebody who's rich. We know they're rich. And you become somebody in your workplace who actively lives out the friendship with people different from yourself that Jesus lived. The richest of all, who gave up all so he could come and be friends with lots of farmers and poor people and lepers in the middle of Israel, along with many priests and rabbis and kings and rulers. Let me ask you about small group. We love small groups. Are you in a small group where you intentionally go to try to build friendship and to invest in people different from you? Or do you go to a small group thinking, I want to go to a small group where it suits me and I feel comfortable and it's easy? That's one that really makes a difference, right? Because it's very easy, and there's lots of people who say, hey, let's do, multi-ethnic church, let's do multi-ethnic small group, and the question is, well, will you actually do it when it matters? Will you choose to befriend people who are different from you? Guess what? It's harder to be friends with somebody different from you than it is to be friends with somebody who's like you. It's way harder. There's lots of things you misunderstand and you don't get right, and you have to ask lots of questions, and you have to embody humble grace. Actively pursue those things and seek to learn what it's like to be somebody who has a different history and a different national heritage and a different life experience from you. You can do that online, you can do that through who you follow, on social media. But the best way to do it is just sit and eat with them. Leon and I have gone for many meals together, and there was one time where we were outside a pub where we'd had lunch, and he and I were talking, and if you know Leon well, and me well, we both were in talking outside, yeah, like this. And a guy who walked past actually stopped and said to me, "Are you all right?" Right? Now, it actually wasn't funny, because what he was implying was that Leon, the black man, was having a go at me, the white man. And I was like, what's that? What's that all about? And Leon was like, well, do you know, there's just this thing as a Caribbean guy, we're really conscious, because if I get agitated, people think I'm angry, and they presume things. And I was like, what? Really? I've never heard that. I never knew that. Explain that to me. And he educated me. That would never have come without a meal. There's stuff that we learn and we understand so we can live with one another and help one another become more like Jesus. It comes through meals. It comes through time together. So find some things intentionally and deliberately. Be with people who are different from you, who it's quite awkward and hard at times, because things come up and you're like, what? That makes me feel quite uncomfortable. But that's part of how we grow. That's part of how we become like Jesus. And so finally, just to say, we organize this church desperate for you to actually become like Jesus. We do the New Testament journey. Every day, we just try and bring you back to the New Testament. You don't have to do it, but if you want to do it, get on the podcast. You can see it every Monday to Friday, Saturdays. It's a space let's fix ourselves back on Jesus. Let's make him the center. Jesus. We've got an entrepreneur's breakfast. If you are an entrepreneur, we want to help you become an entrepreneur like Jesus, to take risks like Jesus, to manage people like Jesus, to make decisions like Jesus. In early July, we're going to get together. We're going to run a day on you in your work, like a vocation day. How would it be like for you in your workplace to really be like Jesus? How could you embody his values and his beliefs? How can it be that you say that I no longer live, but it's Christ who lives in me, in my workplace? The way I do my job is like Jesus himself living through me. I'm not wearing sandals. I'm not becoming him. No, he is in me, and I'm living as if he was in my life, he'd had my history, he was doing this job, I'm living like that. We run parenting things to try and help you parent like Jesus. We're doing an EP project to release music so we can write music like Jesus would write music and show people, hey, this is what it would be like to be creative in an industry writing music like Jesus. We do sports and social events. Tomorrow night you can go play mini golf like Jesus. You can play football like Jesus. We do leaders' evenings to try and help people lead like Jesus. Small groups, the space where hundreds and thousands of things that are your life that I couldn't possibly preach into, we could never cover on a Sunday. But you can say, what would it be like for me in my space to be like Jesus? What would that be like? That's where we try and work that out in small group. We try and deal with recovery from addiction like Jesus, deal with stress like Jesus. We mourn like Jesus. Our heart is that as you can we just go back to as you become more and more like Jesus, you find more and more goodness and life coming into you. That's our heart. That's our prayer. That's our dream. We just want him to be the center of this church, him to be the center of our lives.